welcome back if you happen to be new here. My name is Jess, as you guys can tell from the title of this video. Today I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys about how I personally review books, as well as the importance of negative reviews. I've been seeing a lot of people kind of being upset about negative reviews recently online, and I wanted to talk about why I find them valuable and why I find them important. But without holding up this video any longer, I'm going to go ahead and just get started because I have quite a bit to talk about today. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to cover is kind of how I break down books, why I break down books the way that I do, and I do obviously review different books in different ways. So, for example, for a comic book, I focus on the art style, the dialogue within the comic, because obviously comic books are mostly dialogue. You can get quite a bit of story from a comic, but I feel like a lot of that is based on dialogue, as well as getting an overall feel of the story from the comic itself, because a comic is obviously shorter. Even if you're reading volumes, like, you know, like volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, like the bigger compilations of them, I feel like even then the story is a little bit more sporadic, so I want to feel like a sense of whole every single time that I read a comic book. So those are the three things that I base that on, and then what I'll do is just do out of 5 and then average those out and do my overall star review for those. Now, when it comes to books that I'm sent for review, they go one of two ways. A lot of books I tend to read, like if I'm reading a book and I'm like, okay, this isn't written the best, but I'm really enjoying it, what I will do is I will do a disclaimer that I'm basing my review of the book purely on enjoyment. That does not happen often, but sometimes that does. I will say, you know, the things that I find, you know, maybe problematic with it, things that I find bad about the writing style, the plot, whatever it may be, but then I will always say that, you know, I gave this book 4 to 5 star ratings on a purely enjoyment basis, but these are the things that I found upsetting about the book or things that I didn't like about the book, or I will rate them how I rate every other book. So I'm going to get into my in-depth reviews on books and why I review them the way that I do. So the first thing that I always cover when I'm reviewing a book is the overall plot. Whether or not I find the plot interesting, whether or not the book stays true to the plot, whether or not, let's say, the way that the book was marketed towards, if that is accurate. Like, for example, The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, I felt like the blurb on the back of it and the way the book was marketed did not follow the plot whatsoever, so I had issue with the plot in that way. So I like to know whether or not, or I like to review whether or not the plot actually was what the book said it was going to be, and whether or not I found that at all enjoyable. And the next thing that I will focus on is characters and world. I obviously separate these, but I kind of think about them together when I am doing them. For characters, I like to focus on whether or not the characters are true to who they are. As an example, I recently read Ender's Game, and there was a certain point in the book, a couple of points actually, where Ender said and did some things that were not true to the character that he was, and I kind of realized that was more of Orson Scott Card speaking his mind through the character that he had created. So I like to make sure the characters are interacting with the world based on who they are. I like to focus on character development. I like to focus on just making sure that they are cohesive outside of just normal character development and growth. And then within that, I also like to focus on the world. Is the world original? Are the characters interacting with the world in a way that makes sense? Is it a world without gods, but they say, you know, God dang it, or things like that? You know, little things like that. Is it a completely new world that an author has developed, or is it a world based on our world? That kind of thing. So I like to focus on world and whether or not I find the world interesting and whether or not I feel like the characters are interacting with the world in a way that makes sense. The next thing I will focus on is pacing. I like to make sure that the pacing of a book makes sense. So I don't mind slow reads. I know that there's a ton of reads out there that are just slow through and through, or there are reads that are a little bit slower and then they build up and then there's the ending, you know, that kind of thing. I don't mind books at all like that. I just like purely fast-paced books. The books that I don't like are books that are up, down, fast, slow, fast, slow. For example, The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater was like that, and I did not like that at all. I liked the book, but I didn't like the pacing of that book. Recently, I've read The Fates Divide, and I felt like the last 50 pages of that was way too rushed compared to the pacing of the rest of the novel. So I like to focus on pacing as well. And then obviously I will focus on continuity. This is different from pacing because I like to make sure that even if the pacing is off, that the story is making sense, that the story is developing in a way that makes sense. It's not just, you know, 100 pages of absolutely nothing happening and then suddenly things are happening. In a sense that a story doesn't need to have a bunch of empty space. It needs to have things that are regularly happening, even if they are small, that keep the story moving. And that's how I feel about continuity, that there's not a whole lot of jumping around, especially with books with multiple POVs. I want to make sure that the story makes sense and the continuity makes sense as well. And then I will also rate the book based on the writing style. Do I like the author's writing style? As well as sometimes I don't necessarily like an author's writing style. For example, once again, The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I didn't necessarily like her writing style, but I didn't rate the book poorly based on that. I rated it I think I gave it a 4 out of 5. I rated it lower based on other things. What I like to do with the writing style is I will say, I may not particularly be a type of, a fan of this type of writing, or I am a fan of this type of writing. But I always let the reader of my reviews know that this is the type of writing style that the author has, and whether or not I found it enjoyable, just in case they may or may not have an issue with that kind of writing style. So that's usually what I cover when it comes to the author's writing, or, if it was written very, how do you say, like empty, like there wasn't a whole lot going on in it because the writing lacked a little bit, that kind of stuff. That's like what I like to focus on, but not so much, I don't like to critique a book so much on the writing style as I do just like to let the reader know that this is how the writing style was. And the last thing that I would like to focus on is the ending. I know a lot of people don't necessarily include this, but I like to, because I like to include whether or not the ending was rushed, whether the ending was forced, whether the ending left more questions than answered, if it was like a series, if the ending makes sense to go into the second book, that kind of thing. I like to cover that. Endings are very important to me, and I realized that they were becoming more important to me when I found myself more and more frustrated with the endings of a lot of books that I was reading. The best example I have was, once again, The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. It left so many more questions than answered, and I absolutely hated that. So what I will actually do at that point is rate 1 through 5 each of those things that I just talked about, so plot, character, continuity, pacing, that kind of thing, 1 through 5 for each of them, and then average those out. And then what I will do is actually take my overall enjoyment rating and average that out with the overall, if that makes sense. So I'll add all of them together, average them out, and then take my enjoyment and then average those two numbers out. And that's how I get my reviews. And the reason why I started doing this, because I used to just rate things on, I don't want to say enjoyment, but I always kind of had like a sense of how many stars I felt like a book needed. But I stopped doing this when I started realizing that I was rating books so much higher purely because I enjoyed the fact that I had finished a book. And I know a lot of people have this issue as well. I found myself going back and changing like ratings later, and I'm also taking more time to review books now, and I think that having like a set way to break things down and a set way to rate things, I think is more accurate, because I started noticing from my reads of last year, I had a ton of 4- and 5-star reads, and looking back on it now, a lot of them are like 2- and 3-star reads. So I wanted to make sure that going into this year that I had a more concrete way of actually reviewing books. So let me know down below how you guys review books, if there's any kind of like points that you guys always think about that maybe I miss, because I would love to adapt them into my reviews. But for the second half of this video, I'm actually going to get into why I think negative reviews are important, which brings me to A Court of Frost and Starlight. Everybody has been really upset about A Court of Frost and Starlight recently for one reason or another. People either are really loving the book and people are judging them because they really loved it, or people are really hating the book and they're being judged on that. Now, most of the reviews that I have seen, I will leave my friend Samm down below, that bookish gamer. I loved her review for it. She's very sassy, which is why she's one of my best friends. But I think that it's important to have negative reviews as long as you are not personally attacking an author. And I've seen this going around a lot on BookTube recently, where people are being upset about reviews of certain books. But the thing that I've noticed is in those reviews, they are not attacking the author. They are purely attacking, well, not attacking, but talking about the book itself. And a lot of them are justifiably upset because they've spent money on this book. They were expecting a lot from this book. It's okay to want to give your opinion on it. And the way I look at that is you guys tend to, pick up a book because somebody gave a really positive review, and no one looks at that in a negative way. But at the same time, like, I avoid books that people whose reviews I trust are saying that it's a bad book, because why would I want to waste my time on that? So I think it's very important to have that option, to have somebody whose reviews and opinions you trust, that you can trust their negative reviews, so that you aren't wasting money on books that you aren't going to want in the future. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I'm also bringing this up because there's going to be a lot more reviews that I'm personally doing on my channel. I've been doing my Goodreads reviews every single time I finish a book. I've been doing a full review for all of them, and I wanted to start doing that here on my channel as well, maybe throwing in extra videos. But I've been receiving books from publishers recently, and I was worried about either talking about them or reviewing them on my channel, because I was afraid people were going to be like, oh, well, she was sent them. And I would hope that you guys would know me well enough to know that's not going to be a thing. But I just wanted to also say that I think it's important to have negative reviews, and if I don't like a book, whether or not I'm sent it or if I bought it, I'm going to give my honest opinion. So I wanted to be completely transparent with that and let you guys know that I will always say, it was sent to me from so-and-so, like whoever it was sent to me from. So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please think about giving it a thumbs up, and also think about subscribing. But I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.